Hey friends, today I'm gonna do a 2018 releases wrap up. So I did this last year and I really enjoyed doing it because it's kind of like a little bit reflecting on what I've actually read of my anticipated releases. It's also talking about some books that maybe didn't really get a spotlight so far in these end of the year videos, and so let's just get into it. Once again, we're gonna start with this overview of all of my most anticipated releases. So for the most part, these are books that showed up in my most anticipated releases quarterly videos. Not all of them. Sometimes I delete some, sometimes I add some. It just always depends a little bit on how the year is going, and then also obviously I want them to fit all in a nice picture. But here are basically all of the most anticipated releases that I talked about in my videos. And these were 65 most anticipated releases. And it's just astounding to me because this is already a hugely cut down number. But out of these 65, I read these 31. So once again, read almost half of my most anticipated releases, which is just really amazing. Out of these 31, I loved 15. So once again, basically half is what I loved. I think that is very good. And honestly, these are really the books that I loved. Like there's a couple more 4 stars in here, but I just didn't love them. So these are really just books that I really genuinely loved quite a lot. And so this is just makes me really happy to see that. And then there's 6 that I kind of disliked. It's another one where some of the ratings are kind of good, but I just wanted more from them or something like that, just had higher expectations, etc. And everything else I just felt pretty neutral about. Maybe a very good neutral, maybe a not so good neutral, something in that kind of range. And here are the 34 unread books from my most anticipated releases list. So out of these 34, 7 were DNFs. I, this time around, thankfully only have 1 that I deleted off the list because it had, in this case, problematic elements. Last year I deleted quite a lot for not being interested anymore or having problematic elements. The fact that it's only 1 makes me very happy. And then out of the ones that are left, I have 5 already on my TBR. So hopefully these will get read in the first quarter of 2019. So now that we have this part of the video done, overall this year I read 66 2018 releases. That is more than half of what I read, and it just makes me happy, but it also makes me sad because I want to read more backlist. But I know that a lot of these were arcs, a lot of these were just spontaneous things that I didn't really have on my radar that just were available as an audiobook on Overdrive. So it's exciting, but also it's I want to read more backlist. It's always this kind of two things at the same time, but it's still pretty cool. I read 66 books that only came out last year. That's pretty cool, honestly. And as last year, I just want to go through some categories and talk about 2018 releases that just stood out to me in these categories now. This time around, I'm not gonna mention the books that were in my top books list, and I also mostly left out everything that I mentioned in my underrated books. So please watch my top books list and my underrated books list, especially the underrated books, because these books are really underrated, and a lot of them were 2018 releases. Not exclusively, but a lot of them were, and you should really check that out for some really good recommendations. So I will not mention them here and just try to give some other books a spotlight and just talk about some other books that just didn't, that are popular and very much you will all have heard about them, some of them, but I just want to talk about them and that I really loved them this year. So the first category is YA fantasy. I have a couple of ones. The obvious one I think is Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. Loved it. I love the audiobooks for this duology as well, and I just really think this is such a fantastic duology, and Muse of Nightmares was such a fantastic ending. Then I also have Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha and Young, which didn't really get any love on my channel because I literally just finished this on the last day of 2018, but this is definitely an amazing book that talks about such important topics and does it in a really, really great way. It is a New York Times bestseller for a couple of weeks, and it just makes me incredibly happy because it's Asian inspired fantasy. It has a female romance, and it's just really, really lovely. Another YA fantasy release that I really loved was To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. This is a very, very loose retelling of The Little Mermaid, but I just really loved it. I loved the world building. I loved the characters. Holy shit. And I really loved the romance as well. So this is definitely one that I also just just had to mention somewhere as a book that really stood out to me in 2018. And finally, one more YA fantasy that I want to mention is Heart of Thorns by Brie Barton, because this book just really was a book that was kind of like written with me in mind. I feel like it very much ticks a lot of my boxes when it comes to this kind of fantasy, and especially the second half was really good. And honestly, the second half was kind of a 5-star rating. I just thought that the first half was very, very slow. Otherwise, it honestly could have been, I'm just saying it could have been a favorite of the year, but still, I really liked this, and it is definitely another one that I've rarely seen people talk about that I think is very underrated. So for that alone, I think it deserves a spot on here. Then I have some YA contemporaries, and here I definitely want to recommend one that I also mentioned in my underrated books, but this is a 5-star read that did not find a space on my top books of the year list, and so it was really important for me to mention this in this one as well. And that is Summerbird Blue by Akemi Dawn Bowman, because this is just such an amazing novel with beautiful writing that deals with grief. It has songwriting in there, it has questioning sexuality in there, but it is definitely very clearly like some kind of ace-back. The characters kind of, you know, thinking about like using aromantic or asexual as labels, so it's definitely very clearly in that direction, but I think it just generally really works well as questioning representation, and it's just fucking beautiful and just so underrated, and I really, really loved it. It was such an emotional ride, like definitely very emotional. You should definitely know what you're getting into. The main character's sister dies, and so that's definitely a lot, and it deals a lot with this grief, so obviously make sure that you can handle that. And I wouldn't really recommend reading it close to losing someone you're close to, but if you can handle it, it is amazing. Just such a great book and highly underrated as well. And another 2018 contemporary that I loved was Puddin by Julie Murphy. I just really love Julie Murphy, and Puddin was no exception. It was just so much fun. Julie Murphy can write some fucking amazing romance. This story is told from 2 POVs, and both of these girls have romances, and both of them were amazing. Like, she writes such wonderful fluffy romances, but I also loved all of the friendship dynamics, and it's just amazing. Like, honestly, I know Julie Murphy is like a name that a lot of people know, but I still think that her books do not get enough hype on BookTube, especially, I feel like. So especially now that the Dumplin movie has come out, read Dumplin and then read Puddin. It's amazing. I also could not make this list without talking one of my favorite nonfiction books that I read in 2018, and specifically a memoir. One of them was on my top books of the year list, but another one that I really, really loved and I got a 5-star rating from me was Becoming by Michelle Obama. Now, this is obviously a book that everybody and their mother has read, that everybody loves, and it is with good reason. This is an incredible memoir. This was just so well written. It's a memoir by a person that's not a writer, and it was incredibly well written. I just want to read a fiction novel by Michelle Obama because I loved the writing so much, and it was just really great to see this super public person, and on top of that, a Black woman who a lot of people really want to come for, who a lot of people really search for vulnerable points. This person opening up like this and really telling her whole story from her childhood to after the White House, I think that is remarkable, and I really applaud Michelle Obama for just telling this story and being so open about things. I really loved it. I also want to talk about my favorite YA sci-fi, and that is actually a release that came out previously in the UK but was released in 2018 in the US, and that was The Loneliest Girl in the Universe by Lauren James. This is just such an interesting science fiction novel, and I don't even want to talk about it much. I even had a hard time reviewing it because I just don't really want to tell you much about it. I can honestly just say that it is a wonderful YA science fiction book, and I think that it's very unique. I think it's very different, and it is just a really entertaining, enjoyable story to read about, and that's all I'm going to say about it, honestly. And then I want to talk about favorite middle grade. Now, I'm pretty sure these are the only 2 middle grade books that I read in 2018, but I love them both a lot, and so I just really wanted to put them on the list, especially because I usually don't really talk about middle grade, and so I thought, you know, it would be a good time that if I enjoy a middle grade, I might as well should talk about it. The first one is very obvious, and that is A City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab. I think that this is just such a wonderful story, and it just really is a completely usual Victoria Schwab story. Like, you can see all of Victoria Schwab's usual things in here. It's just that it's middle grade. It still has amazing characters, amazing world building, an amazing storyline, but it's middle grade. I just really think that if you're maybe still hesitant about picking this up because you're like, oh, I love Victoria Schwab, but I'm not really into middle grade, this is definitely worth a read. And I think as far as like trying to get into middle grade, if you are a fan of Victoria Schwab, I think that this is such a good door opener to get into the world of middle grade, because you will find a lot of things that are familiar just because it is a Victoria Schwab book, but you will also just find a lot of things that are just middle grade. And so who knows, maybe you're like, oh my god, I actually really enjoyed these themes, and pick up more middle grade. It's definitely kind of how I feel about it, actually. The other one I want to talk about is Drumroll Please by Lisa Jen Bigelow. This is just such a great middle grade contemporary that is about, well, it just has the usual themes of middle grade, I feel like, but on top of that, it is about the main character realizing that she likes girls. And I just really love that. I loved so many of the themes in it. It has a lot to do with music. I just love seeing like a young girl being a drummer, and just seeing her fall in love with a girl for the first time, and a lot of themes about friendship in here as well. I definitely think this is another one of those middle grade books that very clearly portrays the themes of middle grade as far as I understand them, but is so readable for every age. And then lastly, I also talked about like favorite characters and like favorite relationship. Now, favorite characters. Honestly, I could not decide this time around because I read so many books with so many amazing main characters and so many amazing cast of characters. There wasn't really one that stood out that I could talk about. Like Ink Mistress, The Queen's Rising, The Bridesiders, The Daughter of the Siren Queen. I don't even, like, honestly, there were just so many amazing casts of characters that I read in 2018 releases that I just really couldn't think of one that really stood out to me. But I do have a favorite relationship that I want to talk about, and that is in Soccer Girls by Claire Legrand. I mean, honestly, I feel like there's like a female-female romance and a male-female romance, and honestly, both of these were great, but the female-female romance is definitely the relationship that stood out to me. It was just so well written, and in general, like, I could have put Soccer Girls on the YA fantasy category as well. Like, I really, really enjoyed the book, but I just only wanted to mention each book in one category, so I decided to just put it in this category. But definitely huge recommendation for this whole book. But this is just really the aspect that stood out to me. Like, it was just one of the best in general romances, but especially female-female romances I have read all year. And there was a really wonderful, beautifully portrayed sex scene in here as well that I just love. Like, I love when YA portrays sex scenes in that way, where it's not just fade to black, but you kind of understand what's going on. And the fact that it was female-female is just making me so happy, and it's just so important. I just love this whole development, and I loved where they were at the end, and everything was just beautiful, and I just loved this relationship so much. And yeah, this was my 2018 releases wrap up. Honestly, I could talk about so many more things. I could talk about so many more books, but it was actually kind of hard to really narrow down these things this year, just because 66 books that I read were 2018 releases. So I just really try not to be like too extra about this and go into like the smallest little categories, because it would have been a forever video, and I just kind of wanted to just take my time to talk about a couple of ones. But there's honestly so many more amazing books, and as I said, please watch my top books of the year and my underrated books of the year, because they have so many amazing recommendations in there, and a lot of these books would have been in this video if I didn't already mention them in that video or in these videos. So please just check them out as well, and let me know if you had like a standout 2018 release, maybe a new author that you discovered. I didn't really talk about that either. Honestly, favorite debut author is pretty obviously Rebecca Ross, because holy shit, The Queen's Rising was not a debut. Like, that's a lie, come on. So yeah, but if you have anything that like stood out to you as far as 2018 releases go, I definitely want to know about it in the comments. And yeah, I make new videos every Wednesday and Sunday with occasional reviews on Friday, so click subscribe to never miss anything, and hit the little bell so you get notified as well. And thank you so much for watching. I guess I'll see you soon. Bye!